Elena's daughters caught her in a tight embrace the moment she reached them. All three women were crying, holding each other like they might never let go. The people around them in the audience were still standing, still clapping, some reaching out to touch Elena's shoulder or arm as if she were somehow magical now. "Mama," her older daughter managed to choke out between sobs. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Really tell us?" Elena cupped her daughter's face with her swollen, aching hands. "Because, my darling, you were more important. You and your sister and your brother. I made my choice and I never regretted it." "How could I when that choice gave me you?" "But you gave up everything," her younger daughter said, tears streaming down her face. "No," Elena said firmly, pulling both daughters close again. "I gave up one dream to live another. Both were beautiful. Both were worth it." Around them, people were slowly beginning to gather their coats and programs, but nobody was rushing. They were moving slowly, talking in hushed, reverent tones. This hadn't been just another concert. This was the kind of evening people would remember for the rest of their lives. The kind of story they'd tell their grandchildren someday. A young couple approached Elena hesitantly. The woman was holding a program and a pen. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, "but could we possibly get your autograph? That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Elena looked startled. "My autograph? But I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," the young woman said earnestly. "You're incredible. I studied piano for 12 years and quit when I went to university. Watching you tonight, I think maybe I want to start again." Elena took the program with trembling hands and signed her name. More people started to line up. It was surreal. An hour ago, she'd been just another face in the crowd. Now people were treating her like a celebrity. Victor had been giving interviews to several music journalists who had been in the audience. Now he made his way through the crowd to Elena. He'd shed his performance jacket and looked more human somehow, more approachable than he had on stage. "Signora Marchetti," he said, "I have a proposition for you. If you are serious about considering performing again, I would like to help. I have connections with excellent physical therapists who specialize in musicians' injuries. I can arrange practice space, and I would be honored, truly honored, if you would allow me to coach you. No charge, of course. Consider it my apology for my behavior earlier this evening." Elena looked at him carefully. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "What happened tonight was a gift. You gave me that even if you didn't mean to." "Perhaps," Victor said, "but I would still like to help. I meant what I said on stage. What you have that cannot be taught, but with some support, some preparation, you could be performing regularly again, if you want to." Elena's younger daughter spoke up. "Mama, you should do it." "When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" "I don't know," Elena said honestly. "Maybe never." "Then it's time," her older daughter said. "We're adults now. We have our own families. You don't have to take care of us anymore. Let us take care of you for a change." Elena felt fresh tears coming. "I would need a piano," she said slowly. "To practice." "Consider it done," Victor said immediately. "I have a spare upright in storage. It's yours. I'll have it delivered tomorrow." "That's too much," Elena protested. "It's sitting unused," Victor said. "It needs to be played, please." Elena looked at her daughters, at Victor, at all the people still lingering in the hall, and something inside her that had been clenched tight for 32 years finally relaxed completely. "Okay," she said. "Yes, I'll try." The smile that broke across Victor's face was genuine and warm, nothing like his practiced stage smile. "Wonderful. Truly wonderful." As they spoke, the concert hall manager approached with several other board members. "Signora Marchetti, we would very much like to schedule a full recital for you. Perhaps in 3 months? That would give you time to prepare properly. We could even arrange it as a benefit concert if you'd like. The proceeds could go to a music education charity." 3 months. Elena's mind raced. Could she really prepare a full concert in 3 months? Her hands were so painful now she could barely hold her purse. But then again, tonight she'd played Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto for the first time in over 30 years, and somehow, miraculously, her hands had remembered. "I would need to think about the program," Elena said. "Choose pieces carefully, ones that won't destroy my hands completely." "Of course," the manager said. "Take your time. We're flexible." Over the next hour, as the concert hall slowly emptied, Elena found herself surrounded by well-wishers, music students who wanted advice, older people who shared their own stories of abandoned dreams, Parents who promised to encourage their children to stick with their instruments. The young man with the garage band who told her he was going to keep playing guitar no matter what his parents said, and she'd encouraged him, told him music was worth fighting for. When they finally made it outside, the Vienna night air was cold and crisp. Elena pulled her coat tight around her. Her daughters insisted on taking her to a late dinner, somewhere nice to celebrate. Victor gave her his card with his personal number written on it. "Call me when you're ready to start preparing," he said. "Or just to talk, about music or anything." At the restaurant, a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and candles on the tables, Elena could barely eat. Her hands were shaking too much from exhaustion and emotion. Her daughters did most of the talking, excitedly making plans, discussing what this could mean for their mother's future. "You could teach," the older daughter suggested. "So many people would want to learn from you." "You could make recordings," the younger one added. "There's this thing called YouTube, Mama. You could reach millions of people." Elena smiled at their enthusiasm. "One step at a time," she said. "First, I need to see if my hands can handle regular practice. Tonight might have been a fluke. The adrenaline might have carried me through." But even as she said it, she didn't quite believe it, because she knew what she'd felt up there on that stage. She'd felt like herself again, like the Elena she'd been at 20, full of dreams and passion and love for music. That Elena had never really gone away. She'd just been waiting. That night, lying in bed in her small apartment, Elena couldn't sleep. Her hands were throbbing despite the ice and pain medication. Her knee was sore. She was exhausted beyond belief, but she felt more alive than she had in decades. She thought about Giuseppe, wondered what he would say if he could see her now. She liked to think he'd be proud. He'd always loved listening to her play. Even when they'd been struggling with money, when things had been hardest, he'd always encouraged her to practice when she could. "Don't lose yourself completely," he'd told her once near the end. "Promise me, Elena. Don't forget who you are." She'd tried to keep that promise. But somewhere along the way, in the endless cycle of work and responsibility, she'd lost track of that part of herself. Not on purpose, just gradually, the way you might lose a treasure that slips through a hole in your pocket, falling away bit by bit without you noticing until one day it's gone. Tonight, she'd found it again. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from her older daughter. "I found a video someone posted online. Mama, you're already going viral. You have 50,000 views." Elena had to ask her daughter to explain what going viral meant. By morning, the video had over 1 million views. By the end of the week, it was at 10 million. News outlets picked up the story. Grandmother Stun's concert hall with hidden talent. The pianist who waited 32 years for her comeback. Victor Constantine's biggest surprise wasn't his performance. Interview requests flooded in, news shows, talk shows, podcasts. Elena declined most of them. She wasn't interested in being famous, but she did accept a few because she realized her story could inspire others. How many people out there had given up on their dreams? How many had talents they'd buried out of necessity or fear? If her story could encourage even one person to try again, to reach for something they thought was lost forever, then it was worth the discomfort of being in the spotlight. Victor was true to his word. The piano arrived the next day, a beautiful upright that fit perfectly in her small living room. He arranged for her to see a physical therapist who specialized in musicians. The therapist taught her exercises to manage the arthritis, ways to strengthen her hands without causing damage. And Elena began to practice again. It was hard at first. Her hands tired quickly. Simple pieces that she'd once played effortlessly now required intense concentration. But gradually, day by day, it got easier. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep. Her fingers remembered things her conscious mind had forgotten. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at the music verein again, waiting to walk out for her own recital. The hall was sold out, every single seat. Her children were in the front row this time, along with her grandchildren. Victor was there too, and many of the same people who'd been in the audience that first night. But there were others as well. People who'd seen the video online and traveled from other countries just to hear her play. Musicians who'd been inspired by her story. Regular people who just needed to believe that second chances were possible. Elena wore a new dress, deep burgundy, that her daughters had insisted on buying her. Her hair was styled elegantly. She looked like a professional pianist, which she supposed she was now, even if she still couldn't quite believe it. As she walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and warm. She smiled, genuinely smiled, and sat at the piano. Her piano now. The concert hall had purchased it specially for her use. She'd chosen her program carefully. Pieces that meant something to her personally. Some Chopin, because it was what she'd been playing that first night. Some Debussy, because its delicate beauty didn't require the physical strength that aggravated her arthritis. And she'd end with Rachmaninoff, because how could she not? As her hands touched the keys for that first piece, Elena closed her eyes and let herself feel everything. The joy, the gratitude, the bittersweet ache of all those lost years, the triumph of finding her way back. But mostly she felt peace, because here was the truth that Elena had learned. It's never too late. Not really. Life might take you on detours, might ask you to postpone your dreams or set them aside for a while. You might lose years, decades even, to other responsibilities, other callings. But if something is truly part of who you are, it doesn't die. It waits, patient and quiet, like a seed in winter, ready to bloom again when the time is right. Elena had been a pianist at 20. She'd been a mother and a widow and a seamstress for 32 years. And now at 63 she was a pianist again. Not because she'd never stopped being one, but because some things are so deeply woven into your soul that they can never truly be taken away. The music poured from her fingers, filling the hall with sound and emotion and the story of a life fully lived. And in that moment, Elena was exactly where she was always meant to be. Home. The standing ovation at the end was even longer than the first time. But Elena barely noticed. She was too busy feeling grateful. For music, for second chances, for daughters who supported her dreams, for a famous pianist who'd accidentally given her the push she needed, for all of it. Because sometimes, just sometimes, life gives you back what you thought was lost forever. And when it does, it's even more precious than you remembered. The applause kept coming, wave after wave of it. Elena sat frozen at the piano bench, completely overwhelmed. Her daughters were standing in the third row, clapping so hard their hands were red, tears streaming down both their faces. The older one was trying to whisper to her sister over the noise, "That's our mama. That's our mama," over and over like she couldn't quite believe it. Victor slowly walked toward Elena. Each step felt heavy, weighted with the realization of what he'd done. He'd meant to make a joke, to have a little fun at someone's expense. Instead, he'd inadvertently given this woman something precious. A chance, a moment. But he'd also almost denied the audience the privilege of hearing something truly special. If she'd said no, if she'd been too embarrassed to try, they would have missed this. He would have missed this. When he reached the piano, Elena was trying to stand up, her legs shaky after sitting tensely for so long. Victor reached out to steady her, and then he did something that shocked everyone in the hall, including himself. He bowed to her. Not a little nod. A deep formal bow, the kind you give to royalty or to a master or to someone you respect more than words can express. The audience gasped. Victor Constantine didn't bow to people. People bowed to him. He was the star, the master, the one everyone else looked up to. But here he was, bending at the waist in front of this elderly woman in her simple blue dress. When he straightened up, his eyes were wet. "Forgive me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. The microphone picked it up, carrying his words through the hall. "I did not know. I did not understand. Who are you?" Elena pulled out the handkerchief her daughter had pressed into her hand before she'd gone up on stage. She wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. Her hands were still shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off now, and the pain in her joints was making itself known. But more than the pain, she felt something else. A lightness, like she'd been carrying something heavy for 30 years and had finally set it down. "Elena Marchetti," she said simply. Her voice was quiet, but in the hushed hall everyone could hear her. "I was a pianist once. A very long time ago." Victor shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "You are a pianist. Not were. Are." He took her hand gently and raised it up, then raised his other hand to encourage the audience. The applause, which had started to die down, surged back to life. People were cheering now, calling out. Somewhere in the middle section, someone started chanting, "Brava, brava," and others picked it up. Elena looked out at all those faces, all those people standing for her, and something inside her broke open. She'd spent so many years being small, being invisible, being just someone's mother or someone's seamstress. She'd told herself that was enough, that she didn't need recognition or applause or anything else. And it had been enough. Her life had been full and meaningful. But this, standing here with hundreds of people showing her that what she'd just done mattered, that her gift wasn't wasted or forgotten, that the music in her soul was real and valuable, this was healing something she hadn't even known was broken. In the audience, the older gentleman who'd been first to stand was still clapping, but now he was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. His wife sitting next to him squeezed his arm. "Are you all right, darling?" she asked. He nodded. He paused, his voice thick. "I gave up violin when I was 20. I thought I wasn't good enough. I've always wondered what if, seeing her after all these years, still having it, still being able to play like that." He couldn't finish the sentence. All over the hall, similar conversations were happening. People were looking at their own lives, their own abandoned dreams, their own choices. A young woman in her 30s who'd quit piano lessons to focus on law school was crying into her husband's shoulder. "I should have kept playing," she whispered. "I loved it so much." A teenage boy who'd been dragged to the concert by his parents, who'd been bored and restless the whole evening, was staring at the stage with new eyes. He played guitar in a garage band, and his parents wanted him to quit to focus on college applications. But watching this woman, seeing what happened when you held on to music even when life was hard, he made a decision. He wasn't giving up. Not ever. The applause finally began to fade, and Victor gently guided Elena toward center stage. She was limping slightly now. All that pedal work had aggravated her knee, and her hands were throbbing. But she was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to your eyes and beyond. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor said, his voice carrying through the microphone, "I owe you all an apology. I began this evening's finale as entertainment, a moment of levity. Instead, I nearly deprived you of witnessing something extraordinary. Elena has just reminded all of us what music really is. It's not about showing off. It's not about proving you're the best. It's about truth, about emotion, about being brave enough to share something precious with the world." He turned to Elena. "Will you tell them? Will you tell them your story?" Elena hesitated. She wasn't used to speaking in front of crowds, but Victor encouraged her with a gentle nod and she found her voice. "I studied at the Milan Conservatory," she began, her Italian accent making each word sound musical. "When I was young, I dreamed of being a concert pianist. I practiced 8 hours every day. Music was my whole life." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "But then I married and I had 3 beautiful children. And my husband Giuseppe, he died very suddenly. Heart attack. He was only 27. Her voice cracked slightly and she had to stop for a moment. Even after 32 years, it still hurt. "I had no money," she continued. "No family nearby to help. Just 3 babies who needed food and clothes and a home. So I sold my piano. I stopped studying music. I learned to sew instead, because I could do that at home while watching my children. And I sewed for 32 years. Wedding dresses, suits, anything people needed. My children grew up. They are wonderful people. I became a grandmother. It was a good life." In the third row, her daughters were sobbing. They'd known the basic facts, of course. They'd known their father had died young, that their mother had worked hard to raise them. But hearing her say it like this in front of all these people, acknowledging what she'd given up, it made it real in a way it had never been before. "But I never touched a piano again," Elena said. "Not once in 32 years. Until tonight." The hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. People were crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. Victor's voice was gentle when he spoke. "Why did you accept my invitation? You could have stayed in your seat." Elena thought about that for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe because I'm old enough now that I don't care so much about embarrassing myself. Or maybe because my children are grown and settled, and for the first time in 3 decades I don't have to put someone else first. I could be selfish for just one moment." She smiled a little. "Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I didn't completely lose it, that those years of practice, of loving music, that they still lived inside me somewhere." "They do," Victor said firmly. "What you just played, that was not the work of someone who lost anything. That was masterful. World class, I mean that sincerely." He turned back to the audience. "In my career, I have heard hundreds of pianists. Thousands, maybe. I have played beside the greatest musicians alive, but I have rarely, if ever, heard Rachmaninoff's third performed with such depth of feeling, because Elena has something that cannot be taught in any conservatory, no matter how prestigious. She has lived. She has suffered. She has loved and lost and kept going. And all of it came through in every note she played. The audience erupted in applause again. Helena was crying again too, but these were different tears. These were the tears of being truly seen, truly understood. A voice called out from the audience. "Will you play more?" Others picked it up. "Yes, please. Another piece." Elena laughed a little and shook her head. "I don't think my hands could manage it," she said, holding them up. They were swollen now, the knuckles red and puffy. "I will pay for this tomorrow, I think." Victor looked at her hands and winced sympathetically. "Perhaps we should get you some ice," he said. Then more quietly, just to her, "But would you consider it? Playing again, I mean. Not tonight, but in the future. With proper preparation, physical therapy for your hands, time to practice. Would you consider returning to music?" Elena looked startled. "I'm 63 years old. I haven't performed in over 30 years. Who would want to hear me?" Victor gestured at the audience, all still on their feet, still applauding. "I think the answer is obvious." One of the concert hall board members had come up onto the stage, a distinguished older woman in an elegant black dress. "Signora Marchetti," she said, "it would be an honor for this hall to have you perform again. If you are willing, we would arrange a concert. Give you time to prepare, of course. Whatever you need." Elena couldn't speak. This was too much. It was all too much. She looked out at the audience, at her daughters in the third row. They were nodding vigorously, urging her to say yes. Victor leaned in close. "You don't have to decide now," he said. "But please think about it. The world deserves to hear you play, and I think perhaps you deserve to play again." Elena nodded slowly. "I will think about it," she said. The applause finally began to taper off as people realized the evening was truly ending now. Victor took Elena's hand and raised it high one more time, and the cheering surged back up. Then he carefully helped her down the stage stairs, where her daughters were waiting with open arms. The music swelled and grew, filling every corner of the magnificent hall. Elena's hands moved faster now, attacking the more aggressive passages with a fierceness that seemed impossible for someone her age. The technical sections that made professional pianists nervous, she played with total confidence. Her fingers found every note, every chord, every impossible leap across the keyboard. Victor had moved closer without realizing it. He was standing just a few feet from the piano now, watching Elena's hands with the intensity of a student trying to memorize a master's technique. His earlier arrogance had completely evaporated. His face showed something else now: shock, respect, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of shame. In the audience, people were starting to realize something extraordinary was happening. This wasn't just good playing. This was exceptional, world-class, the kind of performance that people would talk about for years. An elderly woman, dressed simply, playing one of the hardest pieces in classical music, like she'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, which, in a way, she had been. Elena opened her eyes for just a moment, glancing at her hands as they flew across the keys. These hands that had washed dishes and scrubbed floors. These hands that had held her babies when they were sick and stroked their hair when they couldn't sleep. These hands that had pushed needles through fabric for hours and hours, day after day, year after year, to earn enough money to feed her children after their father died. She'd been just 25 when Giuseppe had his heart attack. One moment he was there, laughing at dinner, teasing their oldest daughter. The next moment he was on the floor, and no matter how hard she tried to help him, no matter how fast the ambulance came, he was gone. Just like that. Her husband, her love, the father of her children gone. The insurance hadn't been much. Giuseppe had been young and healthy, and they'd never thought they needed a big policy. Why would they? They had their whole lives ahead of them. Elena had been studying at the conservatory, on track to become a professional concert pianist. She'd had offers to audition for orchestras. Her teacher had called her gifted, had said she had the potential for an international career. But none of that mattered after Giuseppe died. She had 3 children under the age of 6. The money ran out fast. She'd tried to keep up with her music, really tried. She'd practice at night after the children were asleep, her fingers moving silently over the edge of the table, imagining the keys. But you can't practice piano without a piano. And you can't buy a piano when you're choosing between that and shoes for your children's growing feet. The decision had been agonizing, but clear. She sold her piano. She stopped going to the conservatory. She learned to sew instead, because that was something she could do from home while watching the children. She was good at it too. She had the same precise, careful hands that made her good at piano. She built a reputation, got steady work. Her children always had food, always had clean clothes, always had what they needed. And slowly, the music faded into memory. She told herself it was okay. She told herself that being a mother was enough, that watching her children grow up happy and healthy was worth any sacrifice. And it was true. It was worth it. But there were nights, especially in the beginning, when she would lie in bed and imagine her fingers on the keys, and the ache in her chest was so strong she could barely breathe. Now, 32 years later, her fingers were on the keys again. Real keys, a real piano. And the ache was still there, but it was different now. It was the ache of coming home. The piece moved into one of its most difficult sections, a cascade of notes that required perfect timing and incredible speed. Elena's hands were hurting now. The arthritis that had been manageable when she was just sitting was starting to flare up from the intense movement. But she pushed through it. The pain didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the music. In the third row, Elena's older daughter was crying openly now. She'd never known. All these years, she'd never understood what her mother had given up. She'd known Mama had studied music when she was young, but somehow she'd pictured it as a hobby, something casual. This wasn't casual. This was a calling. This was who her mother really was, underneath all the years of being just Mama, the seamstress, the widow, the woman who made sure everyone else was taken care of. "Oh, Mama," she whispered, even though her mother couldn't possibly hear her over the music. "I'm so sorry. I never knew." Her younger sister was crying too, but she was also smiling, because yes, it was heartbreaking to realize what their mother had sacrificed. But it was also beautiful to see her like this, to see her really truly happy, to see her doing the things she was born to do. Victor had stopped moving entirely. He was frozen in place, listening with his whole body. As a musician himself, he understood something the audience might not fully grasp. This wasn't just technical skill. Any pianist with enough training could hit the right notes. But Elena was doing something more than that. She was interpreting the music with a depth of emotion that only came from living a full life, a hard life, a life with real joy and real sorrow. Every phrase she played had weight behind it. When the music was angry, you could hear loss in it. When it was gentle, you could hear love. When it built to its tremendous climaxes, you could hear triumph over struggle, hope despite despair. This was Rachmaninoff, played by someone who had lived through the kind of challenges that Rachmaninoff himself had faced. Exile, loss, starting over, finding beauty even when the world was hard. The first movement of the concerto is long, nearly 20 minutes. Most audiences start to get restless after 10 minutes, no matter how good the performance is. But nobody in the hall was restless now. Nobody was checking their phones or whispering to their neighbors. They were transfixed. Elena moved into the final section of the movement where the main themes returned transformed, more powerful than before. Her hands crashed down on the keys with surprising force. This was the part where the pianist had to pour everything into the performance, where holding back wasn't an option. It required strength, endurance, passion. Elena gave it everything. Her whole body was involved now, leaning into the forte passages, pulling back for the softer moments. Sweat was beading on her forehead. Her breath was coming fast. Her hands were screaming at her to stop, the arthritis making every big chord feel like fire in her joints. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Victor was shaking his head slowly, almost in disbelief. He'd played this piece in some of the greatest concert halls in the world. He'd received standing ovations for it. He'd been reviewed in major newspapers, praised by critics. But watching Elena play it now, he felt humbled. Because she was playing it better than he ever had. Not technically, maybe. His version was probably cleaner, more polished. But her version had something his had always lacked. It had soul. It had truth. The music built and built, climbing toward the final climax. This was the moment where everything comes together, where all the themes and all the emotion converge into one overwhelming statement. Elena's hands flew across the keyboard, both hands playing intricate runs that interweaved with each other like dancers. The sound was huge, filling the hall with almost orchestral power. And then the final chord. Elena's hands came down hard on the keys, letting the sound ring out into the hall. The piano sang, the note sustaining and sustaining, gradually fading into silence. Elena held her hands on the keys for a moment longer, then slowly lifted them. Her chest was heaving. Tears were streaming down her face. Her hands were shaking, and not just from the arthritis. She looked down at the piano keys, slightly blurred through her tears, and she whispered something so quietly that only the piano could hear it. "Thank you." The hall was silent, completely, utterly silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody made a sound. Elena sat very still at the piano bench, afraid to look up, afraid to see the faces of the audience. What had she done? Had she embarrassed herself? Had she been foolish to think she could still play after so many years? Her hands were trembling in her lap now, and she felt suddenly very old and very tired. Victor stood motionless at the side of the stage. His face had gone through so many emotions in the past 20 minutes that he barely recognized himself. When he'd called this woman up, he'd been showing off, being clever, having fun at someone else's expense. It had been cruel, really, even if he hadn't meant it that way. He'd assumed she was nobody, just another face in the crowd. How wrong he had been. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds. 5 seconds. It felt like an eternity. Elena finally gathered the courage to look up, to face whatever was coming. Disappointment, probably. Pity. Polite applause that really meant good try. But what she saw instead made her breath catch in her throat. In the back of the hall, an older gentleman had risen to his feet. He was standing very straight, very tall, and he was clapping. Just him. Alone. The sound of his hands coming together echoing through the silent space. He was crying, tears running down his weathered face, but he was smiling too. Clapping and crying and smiling all at once. Then a woman in the middle section stood up. Then another person. Then 3 more. Then suddenly it was like a wave moving through the crowd, row by row, people rising to their feet. And as they rose, they began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster, then thunderous. Within seconds, the entire concert hall was standing. All of them. Every single person. The young couple in the front row who'd saved for months to buy tickets. The music students who'd come hoping to be inspired. The wealthy patrons in their expensive jewels. The businessman who'd been checking his watch. All of them on their feet applauding. But it wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping you do because everyone else is doing it. This was different. People were clapping so hard their hands hurt. Some were shouting, "Brava." Others were crying openly. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, a wall of appreciation and respect and awe crashing over the stage. Elena looked out at the sea of standing people, her hand over her mouth, unable to believe what she was seeing. This couldn't be for her. This couldn't be real. Elena's shoes made soft sounds on the stage floor as Victor guided her toward the piano. The concert hall was so quiet now that you could hear every tiny noise. Someone coughed. A program rustled. A chair creaked. Hundreds of people were holding their breath, watching this grandmother in her simple blue dress approach one of the finest pianos in the world. Up close, the piano looked even more magnificent. It was a Steinway Model D, 9 feet of polished black perfection. Under the stage lights, it gleamed like dark water. Elena paused for just a moment before she reached out and touched it. Her fingertips traced along the smooth edge, gentle as a whisper. It was like touching the face of someone you loved and hadn't seen in 30 years. Victor stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. He was still wearing his performance smile, but if you looked closely, you could see it was getting a bit stiff around the edges. This wasn't how these things usually went. Usually, when he pulled someone from the audience, they got flustered and backed out, or they played a few notes and everyone clapped politely and that was that. But this woman, she was actually settling onto the bench. She was adjusting it, moving it forward with these small, precise movements that suggested she actually knew what she was doing. "So," Victor said, and his voice boomed out across the hall through his microphone. "What shall we hear? Do you know any Mozart? Perhaps some simple Bach?" Elena tested the pedals with her feet. pressing them down one at a time. Her movements were careful but confident. She flexed her fingers, and you could see they were stiff. The knuckles were swollen, the kind of hands that hurt on cold mornings and needed warming up. But there was something about the way she held them, the way she positioned them, that made Victor's smile fade just a little bit more. "Rachmaninoff," Elena said quietly. Victor leaned down. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." "Rachmaninoff," Elena repeated louder this time. Her voice had an Italian accent that made the name sound musical. "Piano Concerto No. 3, the first movement. If you have the sheet music somewhere, though I won't need it." For a second, Victor just stared at her. Then he laughed. It was an uncomfortable laugh, the kind that comes out when you think someone might be making a joke but you're not quite sure. "Madam, I think perhaps you don't understand. Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto is one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. It's known as one of the hardest concertos in the entire repertoire." "Perhaps you mean something else?" Elena looked up at him, and her eyes were very steady. "I know what piece I mean," she said. The audience was starting to murmur now. People were leaning toward each other, whispering. Those who knew classical music were shocked. Rachmaninoff's Third Concerto wasn't just hard. It was legendary for being hard. It was the piece that separated the great pianists from the merely good ones. It was 40 minutes long, required enormous hands, incredible stamina, and technical skill that took decades to develop. Professional pianists trained for years just to attempt it. And this elderly woman, pulled from the audience as part of what was supposed to be a joke, was claiming she would play it from memory. Victor's face went through several expressions very quickly. Amusement, confusion, concern. He glanced toward the wings of the stage, where the concert hall manager was standing. The manager just shrugged, equally baffled. "This wasn't in the program. This wasn't how the evening was supposed to go, madam," Victor said, and now his voice was gentler, almost concerned. "I don't mean to be rude, but this is a very ambitious choice. That piece requires tremendous physical stamina, extraordinary technical skill. Perhaps you could play something a bit more suitable. Something shorter? I would hate for you to start something you cannot finish." In the audience, Elena's daughters were holding each other's hands so tightly their knuckles were white. They had no idea what their mother was doing. They knew she had played piano when she was young. She'd told them stories sometimes about studying music in Milan, about performing in small concerts. But that was ancient history. Their mother was a seamstress. She sewed wedding dresses and suits. She made pasta from scratch every Sunday. She was their mama, not a concert pianist. The younger daughter started to stand up, thinking maybe she should go stop this before their mother embarrassed herself. But her older sister pulled her back down. "Wait," she whispered. "Just wait." On stage, Elena had finished adjusting the bench. She sat very still for a moment, her hands resting on her lap. She looked out at the audience, at all those faces watching her. Then she looked down at the keys. They were ivory and black, worn smooth by thousands of performances, by the hands of the greatest pianists in the world. She hadn't touched a piano like this in 32 years. Not since the day after Giuseppe's funeral, when she'd sold her own small upright piano to a music teacher for money to buy food. She remembered that day so clearly. How her hands had shaken as she played one last song before the teacher came to collect it. How she'd cried that night after the children were asleep. How she'd promised herself she would never regret it because her babies were more important than any dream. And she hadn't regretted it. Not really. But oh, how she had missed this. How she had missed the weight of the keys under her fingers. The way music could pour out of you like light. The feeling of being completely lost in sound and emotion and the pure joy of playing. "I know what I'm doing," Elena said quietly to Victor. "Please, let me try." Something in her voice made Victor step back. He held up his hands in surrender. "Very well," he said. "The stage is yours." He walked to the side of the stage, and for the first time that evening, he looked uncertain. The audience watched him go, then turned their attention back to the woman at the piano. Some people were smiling, thinking this would be entertaining in a sad sort of way. Others looked worried. A few looked downright uncomfortable, like they were about to witness something painful. Elena closed her eyes. She took a long, slow breath, the kind of breath you take before you dive deep underwater. Her hands lifted and moved to hover over the keys. They were shaking just slightly. 32 years. 32 years of cooking and cleaning and sewing. 32 years of being someone else, living a different life. 32 years of keeping the music locked away in a box in her heart, telling herself it was fine, telling herself she didn't need it. But you never stop being who you really are, no matter how much time passes. A pianist doesn't stop being a pianist just because they don't have a piano. The music stays inside you, waiting. In the audience, a man in the back row checked his watch. This was taking too long. He had dinner reservations. Beside him, his wife elbowed him sharply. "Show some respect," she hissed. In the third row, Elena's daughters were barely breathing. The older one had her hand over her mouth. She was remembering something suddenly. A memory from childhood, from when she was maybe 5 or 6 years old. Before Papa died, she remembered being in their small apartment in Milan and hearing music. Such beautiful music coming from the other room. She'd peeked around the corner and seen her mother at the piano, playing with her eyes closed, and on her face was an expression of pure happiness. The kind of happiness a child doesn't forget. "She was good," the daughter whispered to her sister. "I remember now. She was really good." Victor stood at the side of the stage with his arms crossed, waiting. He was already thinking about how to handle this gracefully. He'd let her play a few notes, whatever she could manage, then he'd step in. Applaud politely. Thank her for being a good sport. Make a joke to lighten the mood. Finish the evening properly. His reputation would be fine. People might even think it was charming, how he'd encouraged an audience member to try. But then Elena's hands came down on the keys. The opening theme of Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto exploded into the concert hall. Not timidly, not hesitantly, but with power and precision and absolute confidence. The melody rang out clear and strong, each note exactly where it should be, exactly how it should sound. Elena's fingers flew across the keys, her hands crossing over each other in the complex passages that made this piece so notorious, and just like that, everything changed. Victor's arms dropped to his sides. His mouth fell open slightly. In the audience, people sat up straighter. The man with dinner reservations forgot all about his watch. Elena's daughters grabbed each other's hands and squeezed so hard it hurt, because this wasn't an elderly woman fumbling through a piece she barely remembered. This was something else entirely. This was the real thing. Elena's eyes were still closed, but her face had transformed. The worry line smoothed out. Her expression became peaceful, almost young. Her body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her shoulders rising and falling with the dynamics of the piece. Her fingers, those arthritic fingers that should have been stiff and slow, were flying over the keys like they were 30 years younger. The pain was there. You could see it sometimes. A small wince when her hands had to stretch for the wide chords that Rachmaninoff loved so much. But she pushed through it. The music was stronger than the pain. The music was everything. Victor took a step forward, then stopped. He was staring at Elena's hands, watching them move. He knew this piece. He'd played it himself many times. He knew exactly how difficult it was, how many hours of practice it required, how much skill and strength and artistry it demanded. And this woman, this grandmother he'd pulled from the audience as a joke, was playing it flawlessly. In the audience, the whispers had stopped. Everyone was completely silent now, completely focused. Some people's mouths were hanging open. Others had tears starting to form in their eyes, though they couldn't have said exactly why. There was something about this moment, something that went beyond just good playing. It was the story you could feel in every note. It was the weight of all those years, all that lost time, all that buried passion suddenly breaking free. Elena moved into the lyrical second theme, and her touch on the keys became softer, more tender. This was the section that always made her cry when she was young. The melody so beautiful it hurt. Her fingers shaped each phrase with the kind of sensitivity that can't be taught, only felt. Tears started running down her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. She couldn't have stopped if she'd wanted to. The music was pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. 32 years of silence ending all at once. The evening air in Vienna carried that special kind of chill that makes you pull your coat a little tighter. Inside the concert hall, though, everything felt warm and golden. The chandeliers sparkled overhead like 1,000 tiny stars, and the red velvet seats were filled with people dressed in their finest clothes. This wasn't just any concert hall. This was the Musikverein, one of the most famous places in the world to hear classical music. Tonight was special. Victor Constantine was performing, and when Victor performed, people came from all over Europe to listen. He was the kind of pianist that mothers whispered about to their children. The kind that made old men close their eyes and remember their youth. At 42 years old, Victor had played for kings and presidents. His recordings sold millions of copies. His hands were insured for more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. But Victor had another reputation too. He was known for being a bit full of himself. Some people said he was arrogant. Others just said he had a big personality. The truth was probably somewhere in between. He loved the spotlight, loved the applause, and he especially loved reminding people just how good he was. The final notes of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 rang through the hall. Victor's hands lifted dramatically from the keys, hovering in the air for just a moment before he stood up. The audience exploded into applause. People jumped to their feet, clapping so hard their hands hurt. Victor bowed once, twice, 3 times. He soaked it all in like sunshine. But as the applause began to fade and people started reaching for their coats, thinking the evening was over, Victor raised his hands. He had that look on his face, that mischievous smile that the people who knew him recognized immediately. Something was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying that slight accent that made everything he said sound more interesting. Please sit back down for just a moment." The audience settled back into their seats, curious now. What was he planning? Victor walked to the front of the stage, his patent leather shoes clicking on the polished wood. He looked out at the sea of faces, enjoying the attention. "You know," he continued, "I have been very fortunate in my life. I have played on the greatest stages in the world. Carnegie Hall, Sydney Opera House. Right here in this magnificent room, I have played for people who truly understand music." He paused, and that smile grew wider. "But I sometimes wonder, as I look out at audiences like you, how many of you actually play? How many of you really understand what it takes to sit at this piano?" A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. People shifted in their seats. Where was this going? "I'm curious," Victor said. And now he was walking along the front of the stage, looking directly at people. "Is there anyone here tonight who thinks they could come up here and play something? Anything at all?" More laughter now, but uncomfortable. Everyone knew this was some kind of joke, but nobody wanted to be part of it. People looked down at their programs or suddenly became very interested in their shoes. Victor's eyes swept across the rows of seats. Past the young couple in the front row who had probably spent half a month's salary on tickets. Past the businessman who kept checking his watch. Past the group of music students who looked terrified at the very thought of playing in front of Victor Constantine. And then his eyes stopped. Third row, slightly to the left. There was a woman sitting there. Maybe in her early 60s, maybe a bit older. She wasn't wearing the kind of jewelry that most people in the hall were wearing. Her dress was nice but simple, dark blue and practical. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She had the kind of face that made you think of grandmothers who baked cookies and told good stories. She was sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking directly at the stage with these incredibly calm eyes. "You," Victor said, pointing straight at her. "Yes, you, madam, in the blue dress. Would you honor us this evening?" The spotlight operator, who had been following Victor's gaze, swung the bright light onto the woman. Suddenly, she was lit up like an actor on stage, and everyone in the hall turned to look at her. The woman's daughter, who was sitting right next to her, made a small, gasping sound. She grabbed her mother's hand, squeezing it tight. "Mama, no," she whispered urgently in Italian. "You don't have to do this." The woman, whose name was Elena, felt her heart start to pound. The light was so bright, all those faces turning toward her, hundreds of eyes staring. She could feel her cheeks getting hot. Her hands, which had been resting so peacefully in her lap just seconds ago, suddenly felt heavy and awkward. Victor was still smiling his showman's smile, completely confident. He thought this would be fun, a little entertainment before the real end of the evening. Maybe the woman would play a few notes of something simple,